Hello and welcome to Landlord Voice, the podcast of the Scottish Association of Landlords, bringing to you all the news and views of what's happening in Scotland's private rented sector. I'm delighted to be here with the first of a new series of our podcasts here in 2026, the first of the year. And as always, it's great to be joined by Alan Grant, who's here as our PR guru and the person who keeps us up to date on all things that's happening in the political world and very much works for SAL, helping us in our campaigning and lobbying work. So welcome back, Alan.
Thanks, John. Glad to have been promoted to guru.
There we go. So, as always, the podcast is between Alan and I, so we'll have a good chat and hopefully bring to you what you need to hear and find out about in the next half hour or so. But before we start, I do want to mention that, very sadly, our chairman of the Scottish Association of Landlords, Stephen Peasnell, passed away on the 19th of January. So it's very sad news for us all, and not least his family. It was a very sudden passing and unexpected. I do want to pay tribute to Stephen, his great work that he did for SAL. Stephen and I were original members and directors of SAL, and starting the organisation, ironically, 25 years ago this year. And I was trying to work out, I've known him for at least 27 years. So it's been a long time and a long working relationship that we have had. He's been a great mentor to me and inspiration, as in a way was to many people as well. So our thoughts go out to Stephen's family at this very sad time, and I just want to put on record the great work that he did in supporting me on a personal level, but of course helping our organisation as SAL get to where we are today. So, as Stephen would say, get on with the job, and let's get on with the podcast. So, Alan, there's a lot to talk about in today's episode. What are we talking about? What's the subject?
Well, if we think about what's going on at Holyrood at the moment, it's all eyes on Shona Robinson. It's all eyes on the budget just now because budget negotiations are underway. Interestingly, there's been quite a lot of interesting political developments at Holyrood surrounding the budget. Scottish Labour have effectively ruled themselves out of budget negotiations by saying they will not stand in the way of the budget. Some people have said this is a bit of a political masterstroke by Anas Sarwar, who is positioning himself as not giving John Swinney the kind of attack lines that he's used to using by saying that Scottish Labour are not voting for public spending increases or not voting for an SNP budget. Others would say that, this is Scottish Labour basically removing themselves from the room and not being part of the negotiations and kind of not getting anything out of the budget. People believe that you have to be kind of in the room and around the table to really make a difference. So it really depends on how you look at it. And one thing what we do know is going over the next few weeks and certainly as we get towards the deadline, it's going to be all eyes on the budget, and we're going to see what comes out of it and kind of where those alliances come from and who's doing the dealing, who's doing the wheeling with various different people. We've got quite a bit to go. With Scottish Labour having effectively ruled themselves out, and with the Scottish Tories basically saying no, we will not support an SNP budget at all. It comes down to the smaller parties, and we've seen the Scottish Liberal Democrats, we've seen the Scottish Greens having a bit of an influence on what's in the budget. Both parties, both smaller opposition parties, have claimed big wins out of what's in there so far, and it's going to be really, really interesting, particularly for businesses, for people in the public sector, but also for people in sectors like the private rented sector, who are going to be keeping a close eye on what those spending commitments are going to be, and specifically what those tax commitments are going to be as well.
So when we're dealing with a minority government, you could say that's normal politics in the Scottish Parliament. Are you feeling this is different this time with this budget?
It does feel different. We don't normally have one of the main opposition parties saying that they won't get in the way of the budget. That stands out. That made headlines at the time, and it shows how combative, how adversarial the relationship between the SNP and Labour has become. And the Tories will always oppose the SNP. That's kind of what they do there. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting unique kind of budget, and we've seen Shona Robertson actually, I think, if you'll allow me a subjective opinion, coming across quite well. But she's positioned herself as a negotiator, someone who is willing to try and scrabble down the back of the sofa for a little bit more money for things that people care about, and someone who is open to working with people, again, in the Scottish Greens, in the Scottish Liberal Democrats, to get a budget that everyone can at least get a bit of what they want, which is, as you say, it's a kind of essence of devolved politics, and particularly in a minority administration, you have to do these deals, you have to talk to people, and you have to negotiate.
So is it all over apart from the shouting in Parliament?
No, there's still a fair amount of negotiation, I think, to go. Again, and it's going to be around that kind of hub of the SNP, the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and the Scottish Greens. We're going to see a bit more horse trading. There'll be a few more kind of behind closed doors conversations that their finance spokespeople will have with the government, and they'll try and get something. And governments are very, very good at keeping things back, and then we use the term pulling rabbits out of hats, and it remains to be seen what rabbits Shona Robertson has in her hat, and kind of what size they're going to be, because we all understand that there's immense pressures on the public purse, lots of different competing demands, health, justice, education, and lots of people really want often contrasting things. So and again, we've got an election coming up as well, so expect some sort of big giveaway. I don't think we've quite seen it yet. Could be wrong, but I don't think we've seen the big kind of headline ticket item that Shona Robertson has. I suspect there'll be something. Quite what that is, only she knows that so far.
Well, thanks, Alan. It's good to get that perspective there from the corridors of power there within Holyrood and what's being said behind closed doors.
So in terms of, I know you've been watching the budget relatively closely as well, John. In terms of for the private rented sector, from your kind of expert perspective, what's the big takeaway for landlords? What's the big takeaway for people involved in the PRS?
Well, of course, you're looking at it from the wider political perspective and how the parties work together or don't, as the case may be. From my perspective, I'm specifically looking at what does this mean for landlords and letting agents in Scotland. So for those private investors providing homes for people to live in throughout the country. And that is the big question. We have always, for every budget, we have big asks. And I think it's fair to say I was a bit disappointed, but not surprised by the budget. We do have an election coming up, as you were mentioning, in a few months' time. So no government's going to come out with anything there that's too dramatic. At this stage, they're going to try and play it safe. And we knew, because we'd already heard about Scottish Labour's position, so basically they knew they had a ticket to be able to get through whatever they wanted to do. And that's exactly what's happening. So there's nothing, I guess, that really, as I say, is a surprise to us that we need to be shocked about. There's no changes to LBTT, to additional dwelling supplement. I think there's missed opportunities there, because I think this is a great opportunity for the government, especially ahead of an election, to say we want investors in the private rented sector and we want to support them, especially as we've just had the UK budget and the UK government saying that they want to introduce measures to implement a landlord tax, for want of a better expression, so a tax on property income. Now, that's the UK government that's decided on that. It'll be up to the Scottish government as to whether they support that going forward. They're not committing one way or the other to that. And of course, they do have to wait for that legislative consent motion and the powers to allow them to do that coming from the UK government. So there's a lot yet to play out in that space, but I think it was a missed opportunity to really stand up there and say, we're not going to do this to property investors in Scotland, especially ahead of an election. However, that's something that we're championing the cause for and we'll keep talking about. So, yes, missed opportunities, but thankfully there's no horror stories in there that we need to be worrying about yet. And of course, once the election is passed, once we get beyond May, we might well still have an SNP government, as we're expecting, as a minority government, but that will give them the opportunity then to lay out their plans for the next parliamentary term. So So let's watch this space. And as you mentioned earlier, let's see what kind of rabbits might be pulled out that hat in the future. So
Indeed. Yeah, so it's
we'll wait and see.
The old sort of could be better, could be worse, sort of cliche, I suppose. But no, I believe you mentioned at the top of the show, we have the latest in our series of special guest interviews. So, Jordan, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so as always with our podcast, we like to invite along an expert in their field related to the private rented sector who could share their knowledge and their experience. And we're talking there about politics and governments imposing legislation on us or potentially doing so. And we're going to talk about one of those bits of legislation that's coming from the UK government, and on that thorny subject of taxation and when we pay our tax and how that is delivered to the UK government. So this is a big subject. It's timiest that we look at this now because it's starting very, very soon. And we're really going to be talking about the subject of making tax digital and how that works for private landlords. But I'm delighted to say this is not my area of expertise, but it is of this person who's joining us today on the podcast. And that's Matt Perkins from Hammock. And welcome, Matt, to the podcast. Lovely to see you.
Hello, John, and hello, Alan. Thanks for inviting me onto the podcast.
That's great to have you, and thanks for your time. First of all, I want to ask you about Hammock and what Hammock does and how, of course, Hammock can support private landlords in Scotland.
Yeah, sure. So Hammock is a landlord-specific software, predominantly from an accounting point of view, but it was actually built by our three founders, who are all landlords themselves. So it's not just about keeping track of your finances and everything else. It actually allows you to manage your properties, keep track of your tenants, keep track of important documents like gas safety certificates, that kind of thing, and just really manage your portfolios of properties in one place.
Great. Now, we're here talking about making tax digital, and for some people listening to this podcast, they've maybe never heard about it. So let's start from the beginning and explaining what that means. So what is making tax digital?
Okay, so this is the interesting part. So making tax digital has been around for quite a long time now. It's been a digital transformation process for HMRC. I was involved, I've been in accounting software a long time. I've been involved since about 2014, 2015 when it first started coming through. It's been going through businesses and larger businesses in terms of digitizing the tax system. And it's now at the stage where you've got sole traders and landlords and people who are a mixture of both, actually, and being brought into that system. And what it entails is effectively digitizing your tax process. So you've got 4 quarterly submissions, which means that you have to do those snapshots 4 times a year. And then you have your what's called the final declaration, which is going to replace the self-assessment. That's still the same as it is now, but you'll have those 4 additional quarterly reportings, and then that final submission that's due by the end of January, which everyone is used to rushing to try and get their data in for.
We're recording this session right at the end of January, so this is the deadline date is looming for our tax returns. Does that mean, Matt, in the future we won't be doing these tax returns at the end of January? In paper format or digital format as we're doing it at the moment? Will that be replaced?
Yes, so that's right. So you'll still be doing a final declaration or the self-assessment. However, and this is the interesting part, obviously doing quarterly submissions is not up everyone's street. A lot of people are not really very keen or happy to do it. However, we are actually working with landlords at the moment because we are on the beta testing program for HMRC, and the overwhelming kind of feedback is that because you have to do those quarterly submissions, it makes you stay organised. So you're recording your incoming expenditure basically on a daily basis if you have your bank account connected to your piece of software. And then so those quarterlies really create that kind of build-up snapshot. So when you get to April, most landlords don't even bat an eyelid at April. They kind of, as you mentioned, they kind of wait till much later on in the year, October, November, sometimes December. We're still talking to landlords at the minute who are rushing around trying to submit by the 31st. But with those quarterly submissions, it means that you'll actually be up to date. So when you come to April, You'll still be doing your final. There's one more quarterly submission in April, but as soon as that's done, which is by August, then all the data's there to do your final declaration, which is really just doing those adjustments, adding things like if you've got interest on savings, PAYE stuff that gets pulled through from HMRC. So that final declaration hopefully will mean that you're not rushing at the end of the year and you're able to submit them in a really timely fashion and know what you're going to be paying.
The cynic in me thinks that this is just another way of the government getting the money out of us quicker than they usually do. But this is the reality. This is something, it's not just facing landlords, as you mentioned, it's all small businesses are going to have to conform with these quarterly returns.
Yes, and initially, so it's a phased introduction, and we'll probably just cover that in just a second. But the key thing to kind of realise is, I hear what you're saying, but at the moment, there's no actual change to when you do that final submission, and then you still have that the time to actually make the payment as well. However, for doing these quarterly submissions, at the moment they are snapshots, but obviously, there's a potential later, further down the line, to have a much more, up to date. So with the submissions that you make, there's a pushed calculation that comes back from HMRC, which tells you what your sort of tax obligation is going to be. Now, at the moment, that's not hugely accurate because we're on the beta testing phase. But as that kind of gets more, more populated, becomes more efficient, then I guess on a quarterly basis, we might be looking at potentially, getting a tax bill on a quarterly basis. But I think that's a long way off yet, if that is going to be the case.
Well, that's maybe a bit of good news. So we're still paying as we are at the moment, but we're doing more regular submissions, and that's what's going to be coming around the corner very, very soon. So for landlords, who needs to comply and when?
Okay, so this is the thing that people get quite confused about. So it's being brought in phases. The first tranche of people that are being brought into MTD are going to be in April 26, so this April, which is only a couple of months away now. I'm so used to saying 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, but it's only a few months away now. And that is anyone with over 50,000 income, and that's gross, not net, either in property or self-employment or a mixture of both. The one thing to point out there is if you're a landlord typically with your partner and you have a 50-50 share in a property, then it is that 50% of your share. So if you've got £50,000 income from 2 properties but it's shared, you're still only on 25. So in the first in the first tranche in April 26, it's anyone with over 50k income. Then in 27, it's going to go down to 30k. And then in 2028, it goes down to 20k. And then anyone's guess after that, we're pretty sure that it's going to be then going down to either 10k, which is what originally the MTD requirements were going to be. Anyone who was going to be over 10k was going to be included. But now we've got those steps. And I think there's also talk of potentially limited company-owned properties further down the line, maybe 29, 30 is, there's a possibility that will be the case as well. Because at the moment, limited company-owned properties aren't included in the MTD requirements.
So as you say, Matt, for a few landlords at least, come April this year, they will need to comply. So how can we signpost and support those landlords? So what do they need to do now, bearing in mind, as you say, they've only got a couple of months to really get their act together and get something organised?
Sure. So I think the important thing to realise is there's a couple of things at play here. One, the part we're talking about, which is, changing to those quarterly submissions and end of year submissions. But what a lot of people are missing understanding is that it's actually a change in the way that you submit your tax and your reporting. So you used to, either you or your agent, or if your agent would be your accountant, would submit through directly into HMRC's portal. The change now is that you have to use a third-party software, something like Hammock, for example, to do your quarterly submissions and your end of year. It's a total change. So it's not just the process, it's the change of the platform as well. So a couple of things that people need to do is, if you're being brought into MTD, and by the way, this is very similar to VAT, is there's thresholds, but you can actually register whenever you want. And those people say, why on earth would I do that? But people who are going onto the quarterly are finding it actually, in a lot of cases beneficial. So you need to register as an individual. for MTD. So that's through the government website. You use your government gateway ID and you register as an individual for Making Tax Digital. And then you need to register your piece of software to enable it to then do those submissions through. So as an example, with Hammock, you do your quarterly submissions directly from Hammock. And then if you do your own tax returns at the moment, you would then submit that directly through Hammock as well. Or if you have an accountant, your accountant will take the data out of Hammock, put it into their final accounts packages and submit those. But the important thing is, in both cases, it always goes through this new digital portal. And one last thing to say is the other key part of Making Tax Digital is keeping digital copies of receipts and invoices. So that means either storing them on your computer or in the case of Hammock, again, we have a mobile app where you can photograph receipts and invoices or upload them into software on the desktop and store those there, and you can log them against transactions or just keep them there in as a file for if you require them for HMRC purposes.
And from HMRC's perspective, I believe on their website they do have a range of different organisations that can provide this service. Obviously, we're talking about the service you provide, but other providers are available as well too.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So obviously, there's if you go to the HMRC website, you will see a list of all the providers. What I would say is, and this is where Hammock really comes into its own, is there's a lot of software out there, and there's some brilliant software, by the way, for businesses. So you hear all sorts like Sage and Xero, QuickBooks, all of those kind of options, but they are traditional ledgers, so they're based around businesses, and the structure of them is to manage a single business. And you're doing invoices and you've got income coming in and expenditure. What's very different about landlords, many different things, and the things that Hammock covers is, for example, joint ownership. So Hammock automatically splits out and creates an individual tax statement for those individuals on the account. You also will have a lot of landlords who have agents, or they manage their properties themselves, or a mixture of both. And Hammock handles that and splits out agent statements. Everyone knows it's really difficult, particularly if you're an accountant, to work out the net and gross figures from agent managed properties. And as I said, a real important part is all those other bits of software, let's say, all great, but they're very much specifically about doing the calculations and the tax for MTD. Whereas with Hammock, we have all that other side of it. So landlords at the moment, and you'll know this yourself, Alan and John, is that there's so much being thrown at landlords at the moment, all the compliance side. And the great thing with Hammock is we cover a lot of those requirements, keeping all of your important digital records in one place. So it's not just about submitting those quarterlies as well.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for some very useful information there. And we are going to do a follow-up session on this with members of SAL over the next few weeks. And we'll have a more in-depth conversation about what landlords need to do and when. But thanks for taking the time to join us. I guess my final question to you, Matt, would be, what would be the key takeaway for any landlord listening to this conversation today?
So I guess my key takeaway would be, MTD's been on the horizon for landlords. Everyone, if you've heard of it at least a little bit, you'll know that it was going to come in and then it was delayed. There's no more delays. It is happening. And the most important thing is to get ready now, because there's going to be a huge rush coming up to April, between March and April. And that means that you're going to have lots of, doesn't matter what, software you go onto, there's going to be a lot of people trying to get on those bits of software to get going. So the support's going to be stretched doing that. And then after April, that's when we're going to see the real panic, because there's going to be a lot of people out there who are just not ready to do that first quarter submission. And we're already gearing up. We've seen it already just between Christmas and now, and it's only going to get more and more busy. So get organised early. Don't forget, you've got to do that registration with HMRC. You've got to register your software as well. You've got to choose the software that works for you. So get prepared, get ready for it, because it is coming. It's not delayed anymore. It is happening.
Okay. Matt, thank you for your time and look forward to speaking to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, John, interesting stuff from Matt there. What's your opinion? What's your takeaway? What do you think?
Yeah, one other thing for a landlord to think about, so where we are at the moment, of course, we're constantly grappling with new bits of legislation and new things we need to do and think about as landlords. Making tax digital, to be fair, we have known it's been coming in for some time, as Matt's been explaining. And of course, the first deadline is for those landlords with property income over £50,000. So that's the threshold, and we need to be thinking about that if you fall into that category by April this year. So I think, as Matt says, the takeaway is think about it, get yourself organised as to what you need to be doing, and more so see how Hammock and others can actually help you in that process. So yeah, a lot to take on board, a lot to think about, but as with everything, you need to get ahead of the game.
Well, it's not an interview that will stand a second or a third rewatch, because there was a lot of information in there. I'm just wondering, in terms of what Sal can do to put landlords who are maybe in a bit of a flap about all this new information that's coming down. You know, we're only human at the end of the day, and there's a lot to get their head around. Is there anything Sal can do to again put people in touch with people like Matt, or provide any kind of other support or help?
Well, one of the advantages of being a member of SAL, the Scottish Association of Landlords, is that we can give help and support. That's what we do as an organisation. So we've been talking about making tax digital for a long time now to our members, so it should not be a surprise. And actually, we've been talking to Hammock today, but the reason why we are is because some members have suggested them to us and saying we use them, and actually maybe other members could benefit from their service too. So, and that's a useful resource that we want SAL to be. It's where members can recommend other suppliers, other tools that they use to help make their business more profitable and, of course, easier to manage. So we've been talking about it for a long time, and we will, as I say, very shortly be having another online session with members with Matt to talk us through that process in a little bit more detail. So we'll have a longer session to chat about that. But remember, our helpline is available to all members. So even if you can't attend that session, which will be recorded and will be available for you to download whenever you want to listen or watch it. But of course, you can call our helpline and we'll talk you through that process.
And how do members find out about the dates, times, and how to get access to that?
So basically, you can just go to our website, scottishlandlords.com, and on the website, on the homepage, you'll be able to see the events section, and that gives details of all the member events that are coming up. So please log on and book yourself on if you're a member.
Brilliant. Well, John, thanks for that. And with that, another episode of Landlord Voice comes to an end. Thanks to my co-host, John Blackwood, and our great guest, Matt from Hammock. Just before we go, we would really appreciate it if you would like, subscribe, share, or give us a comment on the podcast. It takes a lot of effort to put these things together, and it really helps us grow our audience and get more people involved and contacted with the show. But for now, we'll draw a line under this episode. It just remains for me to say, again, for myself, Alan Gant, for John Blackwood, we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Landlord Voice is a podcast by the Scottish Association of Landlords, produced in partnership with Alan Grant Communications and Mallard Productions. All footage and music was used with permission. Questions, comments, suggestions, or other feedback should be sent to alan@alangrantcommunications.com.